Generally, transmission conversions can be tedious and daunting for your first time, especially when you're using a transmission that was never meant to be in the car. In this video, I'll show you the process of doing a full transmission swap. We are swapping out our JZX90's original 4-speed automatic for a 6-speed CD009 found in the Nissan 350Z. Specifically in this video is the JK41B, which is basically a revised CD009 with more synchros. The torque specifications used in this video is for my specific application, so be sure to confirm the ratings for your specific parts. You don't have to do the same procedures I did. Everyone has their own way of doing things. Think of this video as a general guide. I've divided up the video into different chapters, so feel free to skip around to get to the section you need. Transmission fluid will come out of the torque converter and bell housing when tilted, so go ahead and drain it to minimize possible spillage. While the transmission is draining, we can go ahead and start removing the automatic shifter. The JZX shifter has a few plugs and is bolted down to the chassis by 4 bolts, and 1 bolt that links it to the transmission itself. You won't need any of these plugs that goes to the auto shifter, so feel free to cut it or tape it up. The only plugs you need from the harness are the traction control plug and the e-brake indicator plug. You can scrap your auto drive shaft at your local Driveline shop. Bringing it to the shop will also help them match up the adapter that goes to your differential. This will be covered more in Chapter 9. Next, we can unplug or simply cut up any plugs that goes into the auto transmission, except the plug for the shifter position module and the speed sensor. We will utilize these plugs later on. The auto transmission cooling lines are held in by a few brackets. If you have trouble detaching the lines from the transmission, feel free to cut them since we no longer need them. Last are the bell housing bolts. You need a long extension with a swivel at the end. The top bolts can be accessed by lowering the transmission. Passenger side will have the starter held in by 2 bolts to the bell housing. And the driver's side will have the exhaust bracket attached to the bell housing by 2 bolts as well. If you have trouble getting to the bolts, you can remove the triangle brace and loosen the motor mounts to tilt the engine a little bit. Don't forget the transmission ground strap has to be removed, but no need to toss it out as we can use it for our new transmission. And finally, we have the two easy access bell housing bolts with the heads facing the engine side. Now to remove the transmission throttle cable. No need to disconnect it from the transmission. You can just disconnect the linkage in the engine bay and pull the transmission out with it. The torque converter is held in by 6 bolts. It might still be filled with fluid and is a bit heavy, so place your transmission jack underneath to catch it if it falls. Try not to place yourself directly underneath it while you're unbolting. This step is not required, but there probably isn't a better time to replace your rear main seal if you haven't. Assembly lube goes right under the bolt heads, and the medium strength blue Loctite goes on the threads. Do this for all 8 flywheel bolts and torque to 70 pounds in a crisscross pattern. The clutch I'm using is an XD Stage 1 clutch, which I've had great experience with on stock power. It holds up great after several tractor abuses and feels perfect for daily driving. We won't be using the supplied throwout bearing and pilot bushings that comes with the kit. We will be using a little supplied Loctite. Make sure the mounting surface between the clutch disc and flywheel is clean. You'll need to be sure to buy 9 new Nissan pressure plate bolts and use Loctite on each of them. You can use the supplied packet provided by Exidy. Torque the center bolts first, then do the others. You want to do this process twice. The first pass will be torqued to 15 pounds. And the second pass will be 32 pounds. These steps are important so the bolts don't come loose. One loose bolt can cause some expensive damage, so pay attention during this process. CD009 has a pretty awesome install video on their channel for installing their adapter, so I won't go too much into detail in this chapter. Be sure to check out their tutorial. I'll link it in the description below. You want to hammer the new dowel just till the opposite side sits flush at the bottom. And I just wanted to add that the only contact point between the bell housing and transmission is the raised area around the mounting bolts. If the outside edge of the bell housing is touching the transmission case, you need to shave it down a little bit more. Failure to do so can cause some misalignment and torquing issues. So be sure you take care of that before moving on. This was by far my least favorite part of the project, just because there was a lot of trial and error. For my JZX90 brothers using the CD009 combo, I suffered so you don't have to. As much. Hammer just past this major rib and also focus on the top corner section. Once you think you've done enough, do a little more. Better to have too much space in this case than not enough. Once I finished hammering, I sprayed the area with some primer and undercoating just in case any bare metal was exposed. You can grind down the welded nuts underneath and shave the top corners of the transmission if you need more clearance. You can now see how much clearance we have. This is the passenger side and driver side. As far as cutting the tunnel goes, you want enough to clear the shifter and be sure the roof of the tunnel isn't touching the transmission and shifter. I ended up cutting away a little bit more than what's seen here since the top of the transmission was in contact with the tunnel. If you end up cutting more than needed, you can weld on a plate that's raised a bit more than the original roof. Installing can be a one-person job, but that's making it way harder than it has to be. With two people, you have one person guide the input shaft into the clutch teeth, and the other pushing the transmission forward when it all lines up.
Right here? Start jacking it?
Okay, go for it.
Raise it up from the back.
That feeling when everything finally clears.
Oh! Money! Bolt that shit up. I'm holding it.
You may have to twist the transmission around or rotate the input shaft a smidge if it's not going in.
Picture perfect.
Once it lines up, it'll feel 100% effortless going in. Do not force the transmission to mate up by bolting it down. Bolt it down only after the bell housing sits completely flat. You can actually use your automatic bezel with your manual swap. I've tested it myself and the shifter clears it in all gears. You just have to get creative with mounting the shifter boot. Vertex makes a replacement shift boot for our cars and I highly recommend it. The material feels great and it's a direct OEM fit. The setup doesn't look 100% OEM here since I have my shift knob set up to be extended a bit, which exposes the shiny threads. This decreases the distance required to move your hand from the steering wheel to shift knob when drifting. But honestly, it just feels more comfortable for me during both daily and track duties. Without the extension, here's what it looks like. All personal preference though. At the time I did this swap, I had a few mixed answers on what's compatible and what wasn't. Honestly, I didn't feel like mixing and matching at the time and just shelled out the extra cash to have an OEM direct replacement. From what I've read, the Supra, IS300, SC300 clutch master cylinder works with some mods. Your fitting will be on the opposite side and you have to press out the studs and drill out the threads. The IS300 and SC300 rods are too long, so you have to swap them for first generation Tacoma push rods or use a firewall spacer. I can't confirm if that's the case with the Supra variant as well. I stopped by T-Garden Motorsport Specialist and bought them my master cylinder and the provided bolt that goes to the CD009 bell housing. Look for a shop in your area that specializes in plumbing, brake lines, and fuel systems. To determine the length of your clutch master line, just grab a string and run it from the master cylinder to your transmission. Then put your string up to a tape measure. You can swap out your automatic brake pedal to a manual one, or you can cut the automatic one yourself. You have 3 bolts that will hold the pedal in place. The 2 from the master cylinder and 1 here. After installing our line, we can then bleed out the air. To bleed the line, you want to be sure the rod is adjusted to the furthest length. To extend the master cylinder rod, you can just rotate the end counterclockwise before clipping it into the pedal. This way, the rod goes through 100% range of motion. Then adjust the pedal so that it extends all the way out. To extend the pedal all the way out, we have to completely back off this bolt. You can also temporarily remove the stopper for good measure. The CD009 bell housing has a plate you can remove to get a view of the hydraulic slave. At first, the pedal will simply sink into the floor without rebounding. Keep bleeding till it's hard to pump the pedal by hand. Then go a few more rounds of bleeding with using your foot on the pedal. The slave should be in contact with the pressure plate once all air has been bled out. If it still looks like this, you're not quite done yet. It should look something like this when done. After you're done bleeding, you can adjust the pedal height and bite point. Just be sure your clutch is not engaged when your foot isn't on the pedal. You can turn on the car and listen to the transmission as you do this. Pay attention to the sound the transmission makes when the clutch is engaged and when it isn't. And then adjust the pedal according to the sound cues. Reverse lights are pretty easy to wire up. First, we need to grab the harness that went into our automatic transmission. I went ahead and snipped at the connectors I didn't need and wrapped the wires up. Only thing you'll probably want to keep is your speed sensor plug and the main connector. Then we want to locate our reverse wires and extend it. Feed it back under the car and splice it into our reverse sensor. You can make the connection however you want. I use the reverse sensor connector from Wiring Specialties personally.
Once you're done, give it a quick test. Now we take care of the neutral start, which is even easier. For the neutral start bypass, you need to bridge these two wires. Personally, I just plugged back in my shifter position module. It does the job and functions as a kill switch as well. Last piece of the puzzle is the drive shaft. You want to measure from the transmission spline to differential flange. If you're in doubt with your measurements, you can just take a picture or video of how you measured and show it to them. I took my automatic drive shaft to my local Driveline service shop to have them match the adapter for my new custom drive shaft. I told them one end will be going into a 350Z transmission and the other end will be going into an IS300 differential. They were able to find what adapters were required and I gave them my old drive shaft to recycle. Your measurements do not have to be 100% precise since there will be some play. Just as long as you're not an entire foot length off.
Today's the day.
With that said, we are done. Drive like you're a grandma to break in the clutch and synchros. No hard accelerations. Don't ride the clutch, and try not to slip the clutch more than needed. 300 to 500 miles should be ideal. The theory behind it is that you want to transfer some of the clutch disc friction material to the pressure plate and flywheel right away. Doing so would increase the clamp force considerably. Too much heat transfers the bonding agents, the glue, in the clutch disc to the pressure plate and flywheel, which reduces clamping forces a lot. The bonding agents, when subjected to too much heat too fast, will glaze the clutch and leave a layer. So what you want to do is bed in the clutch without introducing much heat very quickly. 20 to 40 stop signs around your neighborhood should be fine. You should feel the clutch bite harder, feel more aggressive once bedding is complete. Once bedded, let the car cool down 100%. I hope this video helped you enjoy your new JZX. It should feel like a whole new car. If you found this video helpful, like and subscribe. This helps push the video up the search algorithm so others can easily find it if they need. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.